All right, let's welcome back in our political panel on this Thursday morning. We start with the host of Stacy on the right, Stacy Washington, back with us this morning. Trump campaign senior advisor for strategy, Steve Cortez, with us, and former Trump campaign aide Rick Gates this morning. A lot to talk about. Rick Gates, we'll start with you. I want to play you a soundbite from Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia talking about bipartisanship when it comes to this COVID-19 relief bill. Take a listen.
If it's 1.9 trillion, so be it. If it's a little smaller than that, and we find a targeted need, and that's what we're going to do. But I want it to be bipartisan. So if they think that they're going to we're going to throw all caution to the wind and just shove it down people's throat, that's not going to happen. Chuck Schumer said yesterday on the floor, he said, this is going to be a bipartisan process. We encourage a bipartisan process. That means Democrats and Republicans will have amendments.
I literally don't know why he's wearing a mask there. It makes it very difficult to understand what he's saying, and he's alone there in the Russell Senate office building, and everybody else behind the camera has a mask on. But that's not the issue. Joe Manchin he's been on the fence for years. He's always the guy on the fence. Democrats say they want to primary him now because he's trying to be bipartisan. Rick, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think they're trying to take a play out of President Trump's book. I think Joe Manchin is very popular. He's obviously supported the president on a number of initiatives during the president's administration. I think it's a miracle that we're calling for bipartisanship now. It's almost like it's a new word in Washington. And I just think it's again shows kind of the disingenuous of a number of Democrats that, have railed the president, his administration for more than 4 years. And now that he is gone, they want to go back to this idea of bipartisanship as if it's going to happen. The difference is that a number of these issues in that bill are not going to pass muster with Republicans. I mean, again, people forget what else members of Congress try to stick in these bills. There's so much ridiculous information. There's issues about immigration in that COVID bill. Let's try to keep these bills, to what they're supposed to be, and that's relief for the American people. I agree with Joe Manchin. We need bipartisanship, but I don't think you're going to have it here, and I don't think Joe Manchin is necessarily the right guy to be preaching that message.
Steve Cortez, look, I'm okay with sticking stuff in bills when it's like renaming a post office somewhere, but, big stuff like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour as we enter month number 12 of a global pandemic, the timing might not be so good on that.
Right. By the way, to this point of Joe Manchin, he's really the most powerful person in Washington, D.C., I believe, right now.
Yeah.
And I have to say, he's in many ways a throwback Democrat. He's a Democrat of the era of my parents' or grandparents' generation, which is actually kind of refreshing. Unfortunately, he's basically all alone, which is why I've said many times, I would like to trade some Republican senators for Joe Manchin. I would easily offer Romney for Manchin in a straight-up man-to-man trade. We might even throw in somebody else like Susan Collins of Maine if we can get Manchin to our team. But, to your point here about this budget bill, you're exactly right. Putting in symbolically silly fluff in a bill isn't a big deal. But when you put in serious policy mistakes, for example, sending COVID aid, and I actually disagree with some of my Republican colleagues. I do want generous aid to go out to working class Americans. But the Democrats right now are intent on sending aid to illegal migrants, to people who literally do not belong in our country in the first place, who trespassed and broke and entered into the United States of America, and they will be rewarded with COVID checks. So that's the kind of thing that is not symbolic. That's the kind of thing that is serious, and Republicans have to stand their ground against.
Yeah, I would offer Romney up for almost anybody. Stacy, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I love the trade idea. How do we make that happen?
Yeah, I guess I would offer Romney for Hulk Hogan, right? I would take the wrestler like Jesse Ventura. He was elected. He was a governor. Yeah,
we need people to send him to the Senate to bring him back, to recall him, and don't do this to us again. We don't deserve it.
Right. Conservatives, Stacy, commonly accuse social media companies. This is we've seen the cancellation of President Trump. We've seen it with Mike Lindell, of course, the MyPillow guy, who's a friend to the network here. This study came out, and when I first saw it, I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting. So basically, there is a study by NYU in New York, of course, that proves, apparently, quote unquote, that censorship is not slanted to conservatives. The only problem with this is it was funded by the left. The founder of Craigslist funded this. He also donated a whole bunch of money to the Biden campaign. So the problem is people read this and they're like, yeah, you see, that proves it. And it's fantasy land.
It's headline fodder. So, Rob, I loved reading into the story and getting the details. For anybody who just read the headline, they immediately retweeted it, posted it on Facebook, and then sat back and patted themselves on the back. Hey, conservatives are whiny crybabies. They love to use the word snowflake, but it's really them. They just can't handle the heat. But the fact is, if you read into the piece, they talk about how that Facebook limits the reach, right? So your engagement is way up through the roof and you're thinking, I'm doing something on Facebook. Well, engagement is the people who already like your page, who search for it every day,
Exactly.
whether they get in their newsfeed or not, they're on your page. And that's big sites like Breitbart and the Daily Caller. And they allow that so that they can use it to bolster their claim that they're not censoring conservatives and that the algorithm doesn't punch us in the face. But if you look at the reach is the number that matters, because the reach is all of the people who see your page and your posts in their news feed as they're scrolling through, which gives them more opportunities to at least absorb the headlines or click through to your site and actually get the information. And they limit the reach severely. Mine is down by over 300%. I was reaching 2.2 million followers. People, just 2.2 million people. I only have 96,000 followers on there, but I now am reaching, at a good month, 300,000. Right now, 120,000 people. That's the reach. That's the important part. The engagement, of course, is still pretty strong, but it's nowhere near what it was before the election. And even before that, because they started clamping down on me as soon as I started doing immediate.
Yeah, they've eliminated, so many people, so many voices have been eliminated.
I think this is important, too. And, the headline itself, I think, was almost laughable to conservatives. Stacy makes great points, by the way. The point of this report, if you actually read it, which I did, is they're saying, well, you can communicate a lot with each other, with people who already agree with you. And Stacy's exactly right. The more important point is outward reach. For example, let me give you a couple specific examples. Suspending the president's Twitter account, of course, is the most egregious example of all, but also the Trump campaign, our campaign account in October was suspended because we were promoting the true stories about the laptop from hell, the Hunter Biden, China Biden bribery scandal. So these are very real examples. I would also state that having read this report, I was astounded that for supposedly being an empirical study, there were almost no numbers in it. There was no data. There were no statistics. Very interesting. So it was a lot of qualitative judgments made by NYU that just don't hold water.
Did you guys see this? Rick, did you have a thought on that, by the way?
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously the report's fundamentally flawed. But to add on to what Steve said, there is some data. But if you look at where they measured the data, it's from January to November. A lot of the censorship that took place on Republicans across the board, including the president, obviously happened after the election. The suspension of the Twitter accounts, Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff. So they're not even using usable data in a way that actually reflects what really happened.
All right, so this is happening and by the way, Twitter doesn't put out, Twitter controls the data that they put out. So they can put out data to swing any direction they want if they want. I mean, they control their own narrative there. I wanted to talk about what's going on right now with kids going back to schools. Joe Biden promised that everybody, teachers and students, will be back in school in the first 100 days. We've talked about this, Rick. My kids are in school. I know your kids are in school. But there's been some kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth. Joe Biden's CDC director had one message, and then Jen Psaki reeled that message back in yesterday. Take a listen. This is, by
increasing data to suggest that schools can safely reopen, and that safe reopening does not suggest that teachers need to be vaccinated in order to reopen safely.
I saw the comments of Dr. Walensky, but I will say that even she would say, if she were standing here, she's welcome to come anytime, but she's in Atlanta, that they have not released their official guidance yet from the CDC on the vaccination of teachers and what would be needed to ensure the safe reopening of schools.
All right, so the first soundbite was Rochelle Walensky. She's the new CDC director, and then, of course, Jen Psaki right there saying she doesn't agree. Just quick story here, and then quick answers, please, so we can get everyone in. But in Chicago, the teachers union, they don't want to go back to school. We played that video from a week ago. They do not want to go back to school. Teachers aren't comfortable. The CDC says you don't have to be vaccinated. There is an alderman in Chicago right now, an elected member of the city council, who is now, you can reserve a time to get gas in the inner city because there are so many carjackings taking place because these kids aren't in school. So they have nothing to do with their time. So they're just literally, the carjacking rate is the highest it's ever been in the city. At some point, people have to go back to school. Stacy, we'll start with you.
All right, so let's first go to Jen Psaki's circle back there. And what she really meant was, Dr. Walensky's a nice person, but the Biden administration decides when it's safe for teachers to go back to school. So her statement about teachers not needing vaccines is so true. My daughter is in school. She's in high school. She goes to class every day. They made modifications to make it safe for the kids. They didn't charge us anything extra. Now, of course, she's in private school, and that's why she's there, because when tuition is involved, people tend to care a lot more about what you think as a parent because you're the one writing the check or having that auto draft sucked out of your account every month. So the first thing is, it's always been safe for the kids to go back to school because the private schools opened up in the fall. And I spoke with the Archdiocese superintendent for the Boston Catholic Archdiocese. They have over 30,000 students. They opened in the fall on time. They've had very few cases, and all of their kids are getting an education. Even the ones who have elderly relatives living at home, they're Zooming in with cameras in the classroom. So this is absolutely true. It has been true since before the election. The only reason America's kids, and especially the poor kids, the ones the Democrats supposedly care about, the reason they're not in school is because they don't want Trump to be the president. They got it, and now the kids can go back.
Rick, final thought. We're super tight on time. Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, look, this week, the San Francisco is the residents are suing their school board to allow the kids to return to school. For me, such a liberal city, that sums it all up. Even the Democrats want their kids to go back to school.
Yeah, that's a good point. Schools, I mean, if you follow the science, Andrew Cuomo says that. That's his mantra. Schools are not vectors. All right, they're not vectors for transmission. That is the science right now. That is the most up-to-date science we have. Panel, we will see you again in 35 minutes here on Wake Up America. We appreciate it. Steve Cortez, you're going to lead us off when we come back.